Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel, and this is the kingdom of the house of David. They shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will set up for them. Before we begin, happy Hanukkah everyone, Chag Chanukah, Kashir v'Sameach. I hope you're doing what needs to be done. But this is what we're discussing right now. So, since we began this study, we learned the difference between the rising and the raising. In short, the rising is what God does for God's own sake, for his own name's sake. At times, Israel must do their responsibility of being Israel. Now the raising is what God does entirely on his own without any effort on our part, because it's all for his name's sake, right? So again, the rising, God does what he does, but we also have to assist in it. And the raising, God does everything, okay? God rises, but only because Israel rises, and then God raises. Okay, we got that. So we can read from the title verse in Jeremiah 30, verses 8 and 9, and it shall be on that day, says the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke off your neck, and I will break your thongs, and strangers shall no longer enslave them. And they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will set up for them. Asher Akim, this is the Kima, right? The raising. God will raise up. And this all ties into the building of the temple, as we discussed last week, and the revelation of Mashiach, both of which come from the side of mercy, chesed, meaning it has nothing to do with our own merit. This, of course, is Mashiach ben David, not Mashiach ben Yosef. So we have the temple, we have Mashiach, we have the land of Israel, all of which we've discussed in great detail. What are we missing? Masechet Brachot 49a. Anyone who concludes the blessing of the land in the Shmoneh Esrei, who bequeaths lands and concludes the blessing, who builds Jerusalem with the formula, who redeems Israel, is an ignoramus, and he thereby corrupts the intention of the blessing. What are we talking about here? Anyone who does not mention covenant and Torah in the blessing of the land and of the royal house of David in the blessing, who builds Jerusalem, did not fulfill his obligation. So, anybody who's, oh, Mashiach, yay, we're waiting for Mashiach, or get me to the land because this is my home. But if you don't mention Torah, all of Torah within those things, it's incomplete. Or as the sages lightly put it, ignoramus. Because the building of Jerusalem is scriptural. You can't separate them, and you'll see, we have seen already, they're all connected one to the other. So it's scriptural, i.e. Torah, Psalms 147, verse 2, the Lord is the builder of Jerusalem, he will gather the outcasts of Israel. They're all one and the same. You need the land of Israel, Jerusalem, the temple, Mashiach, and of course the Torah, otherwise none of this has anything to do with you. All of it, and that's because the Torah is the origin of all things. And if you toss out the Torah, God forbid, although we see how many supposed God-fearing people do, you got nothing. This is why the temple is called Sukkot David, translated as the tabernacle of David, although tabernacle is how the English translates Mishkan, and Mishkan is not translated as Sukkah. So I'm telling you, there's no consistency here, and it makes it very difficult to actually learn and get the deeper understanding. So the correct translation is exactly how it reads. Sukkot David, the Sukkah of David. There is an even specific reason it's called Sukkah, because Sukkah is a flimsy structure, and it can easily fall over, be blown over. It does not exactly brace the elements well, hence showing our faith in God and dwelling in a sukkah for 7 days. That's why we leave the comfort of our stone and brick homes and we go outside. Whether it's cold or whatever, we're there. Why? Because God has got this, because he told us. So Sukkot David is a temporary structure, but when God erects it, it will be permanent. Psalms 27:5. Excuse me, got a little thing. That he will hide me in his tabernacle on the day of calamity. The Hebrew says, Ki yitzbeneni besukko, as in it's written sukkah, so it's in the sukkah. He will hide me in his sukkah on the day of calamity. He will conceal me in the secrecy of his tent. Beseter ohalo, he will lift me up on a rock. Psalms 27:5, right? Also written in Masechet Megillah 17b, since Jerusalem is built, David will come. As written in Hosea 3:5. But let's read 3:4 so we understand where we are now in God's timeline. For the children of Israel shall remain for many days, having neither king, nor prince, nor sacrifice, nor pillar, nor ephod, nor teraphim. Some of these things don't mix well, but we'll see. So we have to break this down, because we have indeed remained almost 2,000 years without a king or without a prince. We have no leaders in Israel today. The Erev Rav is sitting in the fake government. I mean, that obviously doesn't count. We have no sacrifices for God's sake, because this is how we used to worship God. Again, by God's own words, we bring the korbanot. This is something that will happen until time, as we know it, ceases to exist. This is what the temple is for. Specifically, read the book of Leviticus. Again, if that goes away, there's nothing there for you. So through sacrifices, why is it called sacrifices? Korban lehakriv, to draw near. Karov is close, right? Lehakriv, through the sacrifices we draw near to God. And as we've seen time and time again, reach nichoch, it was a marvelous scent before the Lord, and he was very pleased. We could see this first when in Noach, right? Now, how do the nations worship their gods? Mainly Baal, right? Through pillars. Nor pillar, it says. No, there are no pillars. Pillar to who? Pillar to Baal. God has to completely destroy all these evil regimes, which is essentially only one simple regime spread all over the world. And it all has to be destroyed, because a pillar for Baal is not just a totem pole. Buildings, establishments, various different types of architecture, hierarchies, governments, holidays, festivals, and of course their latest and greatest, the magic cures. Oh, what, you don't know? Have you heard? While back in the day people used to put their children in the fire and sacrifice them to Baal, today parents are doing the same thing. It's only in a different form. If they said it outright, of course no one would do it. But people don't want to see and don't want to trace the points of origin. And then guess what? Now we have in Israel Jewish parents, after everything we've been through, sacrificing their children, ages 5 and 11, to Baal. Yeah, I will not apologize. So again, you know what I'm talking about. It began last week in Israel. Oy vey. Let's move on before I break something now. Nor ephod. Who wore an ephod? The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and behind the ephod he would keep the Urim and the Tumim. There's 2 stones. Any questions, Israel needed answers. Now the Sitra Achor's side is the side of the Teraphim. So we have the side of the Kohen, our priest, and how we used to communicate with God. And then you have the Teraphim. Where do we see this word Teraphim? Genesis 31. But now you have gone away, for you longed for your father's house. But why have you stolen my gods? Lama ganafta et Elohai, Lavan said to Yaakov as he fled. And Jacob replied, and he said to Lavan, because I was afraid, because I said, lest you steal your daughters from me. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. Actual gods. To them, once you make something your God, as in the moment that you put faith in anything or attest power to anything, be it man or thing or magic cure, government, person, it doesn't matter. Anything other than Ha'echad v'Hayachid, the one and only, you're in the status of Lavan. That's not a status you want to be in. You don't want that company. In the presence of our brothers, recognize for yourself what is with me and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Lavan entered Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tents of the 2 handmaids, but he did not find them. And he had come to Leah's tent and he'd come out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. But Rachel had taken the teraphim. Here we go. Gods, teraphim. Did they have power? They had very specific powers. And he placed them into the camel saddle and sat upon them. So Lavan felt about the entire tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let my lord not be annoyed, for I cannot rise before you, for the way of the woman is upon me. It's that time of the month." So he searched, but he did not find the teraphim. She was sitting on top of him. You see, if one thing gets taken away from the side of the holiness, God will make it so that the counterpart of the other side of impurity has to be removed as well. So just like the ephod and the kohanim have been removed, so too the teraphim have been removed. There always has to be a perfect balance. What are these teraphim? Didn't write it down, but again, in a slightly deeper study, what Lavan used to do was he would decapitate people. He would put salt and oil on the brain, on the skull, and it would kind of not ferment it, but it's almost like shrinking, but not shrinking. Obviously, it wouldn't cause the skull to shrink, but it would dry up. The combination would basically make the skin solid. So you have a skull. Think of the head of a skull that the skin is dried up to it. Now, what did they do? They would light candles. They would put it in a wall, and they would light candles in front of it. You see, I'm sure you've seen this in movies and whatnot. This is actually what Lavan used to do. And then they would write, just like there's the holy name that we are not allowed to utter, that the Kohen HaGadol had on his forehead, they would write the exact opposite name, the name of Tum'ah, and they would place it underneath what was the tongue in the mouth of the skull. And then, when they asked, the skull would speak. So Rachel took these from Lavan, so he should not say, "Give me Jacob's status. Jacob has fled 3, 4, 5 days ago." Right? So this is what happened. This is why she did it, because she knew there was power in them. Were they gods? Obviously not. It's all dark magic. Nevertheless, it's a counterbalance to the tahara, to the purity. Now, where do we see something like this happening again? In the book of Daniel. That big statue, the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar set up, why did people actually bow down to it? Because he had the name Dafka. This was a holy name that he took, and he put it under the tongue of the statue, so the statue spoke. And everybody's like, "Oh, behold your God," right? How did the statue crumble? Daniel said, "Okay, hey, no problem. I'm going to go kiss the statue on the mouth." They're like, "Okay, get this man a ladder." They got him a ladder. He went up to the mouth of the statue, took out the piece of parchment and the entire statue, which actually I think we discussed this over a year ago at least. The statue, which was architecturally impossible. In other words, it was physically impossible for that statue with that weight and those dimensions to actually stand erect, but because it had the special name of God in there, it did. Daniel removed it, statue crumbled, end of the story. Anyway, let's get back to our thing. Now you know. So only in the end will evil be removed and impurity will become pure. We need the impurity in order to become pure as a result. You see, we need everything. So although now in the world it may seem that evil is growing rapidly, obviously, and wildly without its holy counterpart to balance things out, this is not the case at all, right? If you have been paying attention to our teachings, you will know that this is an impossibility. You see, as evil grows here, the Kedusha is growing within the Klipot. So it seems like evil is growing and growing and growing. And as evil grows, the Kedusha inside is pushing it outward. The more evil grows, you see evil, it's about to explode. But then what's going to come? The shoot of Jesse from inside, right? It's like coming from inside the shell and you have the fruit sprouting forth. This is the same concept. So it is evil's job to incubate the Kedusha until it is ripened, and then, like a sprout, like I said, like a sprout that has been growing deep underground in the earth, Adamah, filth, material. Look at this, everything is material. What's been growing this entire time? If it wasn't for that earth, the seed couldn't grow. That is where it is gaining its strength. How shall we say, and a shoot shall spring forth from the stem of Jesse, and a twig shall sprout from its roots. This is exactly what's happening. Just because you see it sprout, you're like, oh, the cute little thing is just sprouting. But if you look underground, you're like, this thing's got already a network of roots. It's been here for a very, very long time. Okay. Isaiah 11:1. Thank you for your patience. Now let's go back to the study, okay? I took a detour, but anyway. So let's read those two verses again in context of where we are right now. We, you and I, are in this world and what is going on. Hosea 3, 4, and 5. For the children of Israel shall remain for many days, having neither king, nor prince, nor sacrifice, nor pillar, nor ephod, nor teraphim. Got it? Got it. Makes perfect sense. Afterwards shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness at the end of days. Ba'acharit hayamim. In Sanhedrin 20b, it says, Rabbi Yossi says, 3 mitzvot were commanded to the Jewish people upon their entrance into Eretz Israel, to establish a king for themselves, to cut off the seed of Amalek in war, and to build for themselves the chosen house in Jerusalem. Beit HaBchira, it's called. It's also called Beit HaBchira. But I do not know which one, he continues, he says, but I do not know which one they are obligated to do first. Now, do we recall when Israel entered into the land during the days of Joshua, what went down over there? Afterwards, okay? First, they established in these 3 mitzvot. So they established King Saul, right? They didn't defeat Amalek. Then King Saul, King Shaul, HaMelech Shaul, then he was commanded to destroy Amalek, and he had one chance and one job, but he didn't do it. Then afterwards, anyway, they built the temple. But because these things were not established properly, whole thing went down. 1 Samuel 15. And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you to be king over his people, over Israel. And now hearken to the voice of the words of the Lord. So said the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel. First command, hey, congratulations, you're king. Go get Amalek. First thing. I remember to Israel, how he laid wait for him on the way as he came up from Egypt, right? They're in ambush, waiting, going after the weak ones. Now go, and you shall smite Amalek, and you shall utterly destroy all that is his, and you shall not have pity on him, and you shall slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. You got to understand something. A lot of people who don't understand Torah think, oh, Torah is cruel. Look, they had to come into the land and they had to kill the seven nations and have it. What is this murder and all this stuff? You understand why the world was destroyed the first time? That's that same seed. And what about Amalek? Amalek, they're still part of the Erev, and we're going to be learning in depth about them soon. They need to be removed from the world. Are these people human beings? There might be some sort of something in there, but their neshama comes directly from the klippah. Amalek was incest of incest, right? Eliphaz slept with a married woman. He had a daughter with her. That child is already a mamzer, a bastard. And then he slept with his own daughter. He slept with his own bastard child, and then they produced a 3rd generation bastard. Amalek. And yeah, okay. It's a favor for the world. And these people will come and they will cry. You ever see those movies where, the hero's got to defeat the bad guy, but the bad guy takes a form of usually like an innocent little girl. No, please, are you my mommy? Right? And all these things. And you're like, no, you're playing tricks on me. And then it goes, and if that doesn't work, then it goes to someone you really love, right? Someone you love most, someone you are closest to, someone that you lost and you're like, you can't do it. And then what's the last thing that you actually see? You see yourself. You have to kill yourself. These movies, where do you think they're getting all their source material from? This is what they do. And they will plead and beg and they will seem, no, what's wrong with this? There's nothing wrong with that. Let me tell you something. Anybody that causes you to deviate into sin, I've met seemingly wonderful people. What did they do? So now I don't do this according to the Torah. I don't do that. And I see where my life went because these are good people. There's nothing wrong with them. You don't know what's going on. Anything or anyone that takes you away from the Torah, I don't care if they're a family member, they fall under this category. Let's continue. But in the times to come, Amalek will be destroyed before the temple, because all evil shall be wiped out beforehand. And all these things are connected one to another. And here is the sequence. The Gra's words for Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, chapter 10, page 3. This is the secret of Ephraim ben Yosef, whose son will reign as Mashiach, and then Mashiach ben David. So, there's Mashiach ben David, okay, that's one thing. That's always Mashiach ben David. But Mashiach ben Yosef is also called Mashiach ben Ephraim. This also goes from several individuals in history, like we'll see Joshua and so on and so forth, who was from the tribe of Ephraim. Anyway, they came from the line of Joseph. So meaning that only once Ben Yosef and Ben David unite will Mashiach ben David truly be able to rise. Think of them as like transformers, right? They got to join together and then they grow up to be the... Okay, as written in Ezekiel 37, so let's read some of what it says so we can see the order of things. And you, son of man, take for yourself one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. And then take one stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, Joseph, Ephraim, and all the house of Israel, his companions. And bring them close one to another into one stick, and they shall be one in your hand. Right? What are these? And when the children of Israel, of your people, say to you, saying, will you not tell us what these are to you? Say to them, so says the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions. These are the lost tribes, right? And I will place them within them, and the stick of Judah, and I will make them into one stick, and they shall become one in my hand. And the sticks upon which you shall write shall be in your hand before their eyes. People are going to witness this union, okay? And say to them, so says the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, there we go, where they have gone, or where God placed them, and I will gather them from every side, and I will bring them to their land, Israel. More specifically, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not owned by any of the tribes, even though it is, Jerusalem is halfway Judah and halfway Benjamin. But Jerusalem is public ground, for common ground for the 12 tribes. And I will make them into one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be to them all as a king, and they shall no longer be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms. No more the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. And they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols and with their detestable things. We discussed, or with all their transgressions, I will save them from their habitations in which they have sinned, and I will purify them. And they shall be to me as a people, and I will be to them as a God. And my servant David, here we go, shall be king over them. Straight up. And one shepherd shall be for them all, and they shall walk in my ordinances and observe my statutes and perform them. Let's read this in Hebrew again. When Mashiach ben David, the final guy, comes, what are we going to do? Ubemishpatai ilchu uvechukotai shmeru va'asu otam. In other words, they are going to fulfill the Torah, korbanot and everything. Things are not going to disappear, okay? That's 1,000 years later. Now, all these things have to take place, you see. That's why God created it, so we can be perfected by it. Kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani. You will be sanctified because I am, or holy because I am holy. So again, after Mashiach comes, we're doing the full things of the mitzvah. It's not that this thing is already done. Come on, these are the words of God right here, straight up. How can you argue with that? Now, we can also have an understanding that Mashiach ben Yosef, Ephraim, is not just a throwaway king, chas v'shalom. So what does he do, right? They unite and become as one. He is the completion of King Mashiach. In fact, Mashiach ben Ephraim has a very important job, specifically in Gog and Magog. The Gra speaking of this, the Gra speaks of this from his book Aderet Eliyahu for Deuteronomy 37:17. It's his Talgumim on the Tanakh. To his firstborn ox is given glory, right? The ox, who's the ox? It's Yosef. It's on the left side. Yosef, Ephraim. His horns are the horns of a re'im. They also say that re'em is re'emim. It was actually a unicorn, but not a unicorn, a dualicorn. Anyway, David was riding on top of one of them. With them, he will gore peoples together. You gather them together, round them up, right? Throughout the ends of the earth, these are the myriads of Ephraim, and these are the thousands of Menashe, Alfei Menashe. There's a town in Israel called Alfei Menashe. The main focus of the matter is regarding Mashiach ben Yosef, who will be from the first to the redemption, from the first part of the redemption until the end of the redemption itself, as written, his firstborn ox. This is the first Messiah. As the faithful shepherd said in Parashat Mishpatim, the lion to his right is Mashiach ben David, and the lion cub is Judah, and the lion ox to his left is Mashiach ben Yosef, who will destroy everything, for he will avenge those who hate. And our enemies know this is coming as well, as we can read the foreshadowing or hinting of this in Bamidbar, the book of Numbers 22:4. Now this assembly will eat up everything around us as the ox, Ben Yosef, eats up the greens in the field. It says, kelochech, to lick up everything. There will be nothing else. The ox, right? Ben Yosef, destroying everything, including Gog and Magog. He is also given splendor. In Psalms 149, 7-9, to wreak vengeance upon the nations, contentions upon the kingdoms, to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, which is exactly what they did to Joseph, I believe, in Psalms 105. You'll see. They tied him with irons until the king came and released him. To execute upon them a written judgment that will be splendor to all his pious ones. Hallelujah. It says hallelujah. Lasot bahem mishpat katuv hadar. He's given hadar, splendor. Hadar lekol chasidav. Hallelujah. Hadar. It's more like a royal type of thing. It's like a regal type of thing. Okay. So again, Mashiach ben Yosef, who is Mashiach ben Ephraim, is going to war with the nations. In fact, in Bamidbar Rabbah, chapter 4:1, it says of the verse in Psalm 60, verse 9, which reads, Gilead is mine, and Menashe is mine, and Ephraim is the strength of my head. Judah is my lawgiver. Okay, Ephraim is the strength of my head. This is the Messiah of war. The Messiah of war that comes from Ephraim. Remember, Ben David does not get his hands bloody as David did before. Because David's hands were bloody, he fought the wars for Israel. He united the 12 tribes. They called him David Melech Israel, not only Melech Yehuda. And as a result, he could not build the house of God, right? The temple. But now, Ben David is coming, and it's a reincarnation of David. And he will build the third temple, and he will not get his hands bloody, because that is what Mashiach ben Ephraim is going to do. Exodus 40, verse 11, you shall anoint the washstand and its base and sanctify it. This is very fascinating. Now take a listen what Targum Yonatan says about this. For the sake of Joshua your servant, the head of the Sanhedrin of his people, by whose hand the land of Israel shall be divided into the tribes, right? He says you get here, according to the cast lots. And Mashiach ben Ephraim, who will come out of him, meaning out of Joshua specifically. And by his hand the children of Israel will defeat Gog and his armies in the latter days. In Psika de Rav Kahana, Parasha 37:1, it says, the ministering angels of the nations have said before God, who is this who we must fall by his hand? What is his name and what are his attributes? Okay, ministering angels of the nations, right? We know that there's 70 nations, 70 ministering angels. Who is this guy, Ribono Shel Olam, who we know we're going to have to fall? What's his name and what's he like? God answers. Ephraim, Mashiach Tzidki Shmo. Ephraim, my righteous Messiah is his name. Says God. Okay, Parasha 37:1. Because of his elevated stature, he elevates his generation and illuminates the eyes of Israel and saves his people. And no nation or tongue can stand, as said in Psalms 89:23-24. No enemy will exact from him, neither will an unjust person afflict him. And I shall crush his adversaries before him, and I shall strike his enemies. In other words, when Mashiach ben Yosef comes, Mashiach ben Ephraim, hopefully speedily in our time, in our day, very soon, he's going to start to rise up. Everyone's going to come against him. No one is going to be able to stand. He is going to open up the eyes of Israel to see, oh my goodness, we are slaves to the nation. Oh my goodness, our government really are Erev. Oh my goodness, we've been murdering our children. Oh no, what do we do? Tshuva. And no one's going to be able to come against him. And then he's going to go to war with the nations. Now, all the wars against the nations of the world is for the sake of incinerating the evil and fighting Amalek, which is why Joshua was called to fight Amalek. In the beginning, he started it after all, and like our forefathers, he too will finish what he began. Exodus 17:8. Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, pick men for us, and you, pick the right people, and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand up on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Remember, Moses is going to direct Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David when he returns. Joshua did as Moses had told him to fight against Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. It came to pass that when Moses would raise his hands, Israel would prevail, and when he would lay down his hands, Amalek would prevail. Now Moses' hands were very heavy, so they took a stone and placed it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur supported his hands, right? The famous paintings that they have or whatnot. One from this side and one from this side. So he was with his hands in faith until sunset. Joshua weakened Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. It was said over here that Joshua almost completely destroyed Amalek. Just so you understand how strong they were, because God says, forever. The kind of power that they had. But Joshua almost completely destroyed Amalek. But it was not the time just then. It wasn't. The Lord said to Moses, inscribe this as a memorial in the book and recite it into Joshua's ears, particularly as in Mashiach ben Ephraim, that I will surely obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. Then Moses built an altar, and he named it, the Lord is my miracle, Adonai Nisi. And he said, for there is a hand on the throne of the eternal, that there shall be a war for the Lord against Amalek from generation to generation. So we have to fight Amalek every single generation. And God brought them against Israel back then for Joshua to weaken them then, so that we can actually have a fighting chance and basically make it to the finish line. You see? Okay. He's going to finish what he started. In Yalkut Shimoni they asked, why is it going to be Joshua? Because Joshua comes from the line of Joseph. Simple. And Joshua is from the aspect of Mashiach ben Ephraim, as said in Genesis 48:19. But his younger brother will be greater than he. This is when Jacob was blessing the children, right? Ephraim is older. Manasseh is older. But Ephraim will be greater than he. And this is Joshua, who came from the tribe of Ephraim. From this we can understand the order of Masechet Sanhedrin. First, Israel are commanded to have a king. First and foremost, we got a king. Fantastic. Which will come into fruition in the future with Mashiach ben Ephraim and then Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Ephraim is going to be very busy until Mashiach ben David comes, though. As the Gra said in the book of Formation, this is the secret, Zeu Sod, of Mashiach ben Yosef, whose son, Mashiach ben Ephraim, will reign, and then Mashiach ben David will reign. So the first king, ben Ephraim, must cut off the root, the Sholesh Amalek, so that they can't sprout out anymore. And then the house of God must be built by the hands of the king Mashiach, who is from Judah. The Gra continues in Sefer Yetzirah, he says, only if Israel have the merit, Mashiach ben Yosef will reign. Like we said, if it comes to the end, if the clock hits 6,000 and there's no Mashiach ben Ephraim, we are in trouble. just as King Saul did before David. That's why he comes before him. Why is Saul's reign linked to Ephraim's reign? Because it was King Saul's very specific task to cut off Amalek. If Saul would have done his job, then David, Ben Ephraim, even though he's not from the tribe of Ephraim, but then you also have the Leah, Yosef, Rachel, Benjamin, and Yosef. Leah, Judah, That's your separation over there. And that's why also, like we said, the temple is split right in the middle, and you have Yehudah and Benjamin splitting right through the middle of the temple. So once this is done, back then, if Amalek would have been taken out, then David would have reigned, and he probably would have been able to build Beit HaMikdash. End of story. But what was, will be. So once this is done properly now, in the future, the two will merge in a sense, as written in Ezekiel 37 that we read, the two sticks becoming one. If this concept is confusing, which I understand that it is, I'll give you another practical example that what we do on a daily basis, for instance, most people don't even know. In the Shmoneh Esrei, we say the following: return in mercy to Jerusalem, your city, and dwell therein as you have promised. Speedily establish therein the throne of David your servant, and rebuild it sooner in our days as an everlasting edifice. Blessed are you, Lord, who rebuilds Jerusalem. Bonei Yerushalayim. What is the throne of David? The throne of David is Mashiach ben Ephraim, right? The throne is first prepared, and it has its own power, and then the king comes to sit on the throne that was prepared. So Mashiach ben Ephraim, Mashiach ben Yosef, is the throne of David. The very next blessing we say, speedily cause the Scion of David, your servant, to flourish, and increase his power by your salvation, for we hope for your salvation all day. It's even in the order of what needs to happen. Blessed are you, Lord, who causes the power of salvation to flourish. What we can learn from this partnership, if you will, is that both Mashiachim work together in perfect synchronicity to get the job done, each one according to his own task. And as we have discussed in the past, there will be no strife between them. There will be no pride or feelings of envy as to who is in charge or who has more power. These two Mashiachim, simply put, are the two best guys alive. And the best part is, you got Moses to supervise. As a result, both will be responsible for the gathering of the exiles, because there are waves, you see. It already began. Plenty of exiles are coming back. We're working with plenty of people who have converted. So this is what's happening. But in the end, there's going to be all the remainder, the sherit, the leftovers that are all out there, are all going to come in. So it will start with the work of Mashiach ben Yosef, and it will conclude with Mashiach ben David. Then they will gather all of Israel to the temple that has been built, as we discussed last week, and this will happen only once Mashiach ben David will arrive on the scene. And when the temple is complete and all the exiles have finally returned, that's when the real fun begins. And I got a feeling I am going to share some of the stuff with you. Not now. I'm reading it myself. Wow. Okay. But it is our responsibility throughout everything that we do, we have to focus on the rectification of the Shekhinah. This is why we wake up in the morning. This was the separation that God made for us to bring it right back infinitely times over, okay? So the three things that we have to focus on, the three things that we have to inquire, obviously we're in the mode of everything we're doing, is the Shem Yichud Kudsha B'Yichud Shechinateh, right? The unification of God and His Shekhinah. And again, Israel, the Shekhinah resides over Israel. That's why we need all these things. So the first thing that we have to inquire about always is Malchut Shamayim, the kingdom of heaven. 2, Malchut Beit David, the kingdom of the house of David, our current study, obviously the Mashiach. And 3, Beit HaMikdash, inquire from God about the temple. Don't just learn about the temple, inquire about the temple. And that's exactly our next week's teaching, is the inquiry about the temple. So thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye.